fundamental assumptions that I don't agree with. So it's hard for me to respond to assumptions that I don't agree with. On the economy, look, we just figured it out with Joe the plumber. Americans just figured it out. He wants to spread the wealth around. And every time there's a poll, there's a different tax plan. There's a different tax plan for America. He's the guy that Senator Obama voted for a Democrat budget resolution that will impose taxes on individuals making $42,000 a year. That's just a fact. He wants to raise taxes in a time of economic difficulties.
But he
the last
to
time president of the United States that did that was a guy named Herbert Hoover, protectionism and raising taxes.
Well, Ronald Reagan raised taxes as well after the first 2 years.
Not in economic times like these.
Well, right after the recession he did in the first 2 years of his office.
Well, look, I would be glad to review the Reagan record, but the Reagan record was certainly one that reined in spending.
Well, let me ask you.
One that I'm very proud of as far as both their economic and national security policies.
Well, let me ask you about that business about spreading the wealth around, which has been a favorite phrase now of the McCain campaign. And also your vice presidential candidate has used the word socialist and socialism. Do you honestly think that Barack Obama would have as his advisors Warren Buffett, Paul Volcker, former chairman of the Federal Reserve under Ronald Reagan, who was widely credited with saving the economy at that time, Bob Rubin, former Treasury Secretary, and even Chris Buckley, the son of the godfather of the modern conservative movement, both endorsing his economic policies and help shaping them if they thought he was a socialist of some kind?
All I know is that Senator Obama's record is very clear. It's his record, not Volcker's record, not anybody else's. He started out in the left-hand lane of American politics, has remained there. He has been judged the most liberal United States senator. Biden's number 3. Joe the Biden is number 3. Bernie Sanders is number 2. And I respect that, but let's not call it anything but it is. He's voted for tax increases, against tax cuts, has advocated raising capital gains tax. Another anchor, Charlie Gibson, said, why would you want to raise capital gains taxes when you know that that could decrease revenue? He said it's a matter of fairness. He said to Joe the plumber, it's, quote, spreading the wealth around. His political philosophy is very, very different about what he believes his future of America is.
Well,
I believe the worst thing you can do is raise taxes.
Can we share with the audience then a couple of your comments about taxing wealthy Americans?
Sure.
This is from April 11th, 2004. It's Meet the Press, and this is what you had to say about wealthy Americans and taxes at that time.
I voted against the tax cuts because of the disproportionate amount that went to the wealthiest Americans.
And then this is what you had to say on Hardball back in 2000 to Chris Matthews.
Here's what I really believe, that when you reach a certain level of comfort, there's nothing wrong with paying somewhat more.
That's what, listen, even the flat tax people somewhat pay more. Even you put into different categories of wealthier people paying higher taxes into different brackets. I mean, and these are different times, my friend. These are times of the biggest financial crisis we faced in America.
Well, let me raise that then.
So let me just tell you again. I also said, when I opposed the Bush tax cuts that is left out of this equation, I said, we've got to get spending under control. Spending was completely out of control. We laid a $10 trillion debt on future generations of America. We owe the Chinese $500 billion. Spending was I think, the really biggest aspect. To a large degree, it weakens the dollar. It raises the cost of goods to Americans. The housing crisis, combined with a country that's living way beyond its means, is a combination which has put us into this great financial crisis we're in.
But so, there's this continuing use of the phrase socialism. How would you describe the $700 billion bailout that has the United States government buying shares in American banks, in effect nationalizing those banks to a degree, and even your own mortgage plan of spending $300 billion to buy bad mortgages from banks, having taxpayers who have done the responsible thing, in effect subsidize people who've done the dumb or wrong thing?
Because we are in a financial crisis of monumental proportions. The role of government is to intervene when a nation is in crisis. A homeowners loan corporation was instituted in the Great Depression. They went out and they bought people's mortgages, and over time, people were able then to pay back those mortgages, and the Treasury actually made some money. This Treasury and this administration is spending its time bailing out the banks. The cause of the crisis was the housing crisis, as we know. And home values, as long as they continue to decline, then we're not going to see a turnaround in this economy. A lot of other things have to happen, but at least let's understand that we got to keep people in their homes. That's the American dream. And they say now that maybe they're going to address that problem. Let's address it first. And so when a nation is in crisis, that's when a government has to intervene. Now, a lot of the times you were talking about, 2004, other times were pretty good overall. You have to have different roles of government in different times. I'm obviously a strong conservative. But when we're in a crisis of this nature, that's when government has to help. That's what our fundamental belief, the reason why we have governments. In times of crisis, we go in and we try and help the people, especially in this situation where they're the victim of a drive-by shooting by excess, greed, and corruption in Washington and Wall Street. And again, I and others said we have to have legislation to rein it in. Senator Obama didn't lift a finger.
Well, you did. You made your comments about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at the time of the accounting issue when that was first raised. Can you cite a time?
In reality, we proposed legislation. I made a statement that said, look, it's not just the accounting. This whole process is going to lead to disaster. I'd be glad to provide you with a letter.
Let me ask you quickly about your $300 billion bailout of mortgages. Some people have said, look, if there's a homeowner out there who's done the irresponsible thing and a bank is looking at that foreclosure and saying, hey, I don't have to work this out, I can just get the government to pick it up. Why should a taxpayer in Waterloo, Iowa or in Akron, Ohio have to subsidize somebody who has done the dumb, wrong thing?
Well, in the simplest terms, if their neighbor next door throws the keys in the living room floor and leaves, then the value of their home is going to dramatically decrease as well. And again, this has been done before, as I said, during the Great Depression.
And that's when Republicans called it socialism under FDR.
Well, look, in the Great Depression, there were some things that worked and some things that didn't work. But for the government to do nothing in the face of a massive crisis of proportions that we have not seen, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine how, in retrospect, how serious the Great Depression was. But the fact is that Senator Obama, by the way, opposes that. And I want to use some of the $750 billion to go and buy those mortgages. And that, I think, will stabilize the market. It's not the only thing that needs to be done, but I think it's a vital first step so Americans can realize the American dream. And by the way, this is primary residences. There's a lot of circumstances there.